Network Dojo.
This video is all about speed. Speed in the lab, that is. So, running out of time in the lab is a really common issue that a lot of people run into, especially on first attempts. Most people will typically not be able to complete every last thing on their first attempt, sometimes even on their second attempts. Things can go wrong. So I want to talk about all the things that really contribute to being able to complete the lab in time, and ideally with a bunch of time left over to be able to re-verify all your work. To me, that's honestly the goal. We have a 7-hour configuration section. I want to be done in at least 6 hours, ideally maybe 5.5 hours if I can. Give myself that 1 hour, that hour and a half at the end. That's all about going back over everything, rereading each task, re-verifying each task, making sure that you didn't miss a silly detail. You didn't do a simple fat finger mistake, didn't miss a checkbox here or something like that. Because what's almost happens every time, if you do have time left over at the end to verify your work again, you almost undoubtedly find a mistake, sometimes many mistakes. And those are so easy points to get back at the end, but you only get those points back at the end if you have the time to go back and re-verify your work. Because just inherently, these are issues that you didn't catch the first time. And unless you're like an amazing rock star, much better than me, you're going to make little mistakes here and there. It's just what happens under the pressure and the time constraints of the lab. So, the faster you can get through everything, the more chance you have to re-verify everything, the more chance you have to get those points back that you actually would have lost had you not had this extra time left over at the end, the greater your chances of success. So, let's talk about building speed. So, one thing that people often think about in terms of building speed is actually like the mechanical speed of how fast they can type and click, your configuration speed. And while that's helpful, it's only one contributor. And I would argue that's actually not the most significant factor for most people. When people run out of time in the lab and they're trying to go over things and figure out, okay, well, boy, how do I not run out of time again next time? I better get faster at things. I better become a wizard in the CLI. And again, while that stuff can help, I don't think that that's the main reason why you ran out of time in the lab. Now, I will, one caveat here. If you are slow at typing and clicking around, that can then unfortunately add up to a lot of time compared to someone who is decent at typing and clicking. I'm not telling you that you need to be, Mavis Beacon, if anyone gets that reference, or the Mario Andretti, if anyone gets that reference of, configuration speeds. Absolutely not. It is not a typing test. It is not a clicking test. But that doesn't mean you can be, one, finger typer that goes this slow and then spends like 10 minutes trying to read something out. You can't be that. But you should be able to just type at a relatively decent clip, click around at a relatively decent clip, in order to not hurt yourself. But don't worry about being like uber speed person and doing every last teeny little trick. While those can buy you seconds, we're going to talk about a lot of things that are really going to buy you multiples of minutes is really what we're looking to get back. Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about the most common things that cause people to slow down and lose time in the lab, kind of from most significant to least significant. So first and foremost, you gotta know how to configure what's asked. Once you understand what it is that they want from you, you need to be able to execute. So when they say, configure a central WebAuth WLAN, you know exactly what the WLAN looks like. And I go, okay, create it, SSID name, interface, boom, turn off layer 2, and set MAC filtering, go to the layer 3, or the AAA tab, radius server, go to the advanced tab, AAA override, iSnack, boom, go to my, redirection ACL, and I know exactly what rules I need to put in there, and I'll tweak it based off of what they want, but I know my foundation, and you can just execute, boom, boom, boom. You're not thinking about any things. You just do. And so the more times you practice something, the faster you just naturally are going to get at it. And the less likely you will be to forget things to do, which would cause you to either lose your points whatsoever or come back and refix things. So, if you've done things 10 times, you're going to be way faster at it if you've only done it 2 times. Think about kid learning to tie their shoe. How long does it take them to do it that first few times? Even if they finally get it right, how long did it take them to get them right? 3 minutes. But then a year later, you look at them tying their shoe, it's just something that they do. It's muscle memory, boom, din, and done. So again, when you configure things well, you don't have to think about it. You don't need to worry about documentation. You're not pausing, trying to figure out, okay, well, wasn't there something else that I needed to do? Muscle memory takes over, less likely to forget things and make mistakes. So that is by far the most important thing to do. You know it. When you come to something you're not quite sure how to make happen, it takes you a long time, right? Number 2, troubleshoot well. There will be a lot of troubleshooting to do in the lab. It is a part of it. And usually there's no warning. It's usually, hey, we want you to do this. And you do it the way that you've done it every single time up until this point. But unfortunately, it doesn't work for some reason due to some initial config or some state that's different than what you were expecting, causes a problem to happen. You got to figure out what's going wrong and then fix it so that you can move on and get your points. So if you cannot troubleshoot well, either you're never going to solve the issue, hence you're going to usually waste a lot of time trying to figure out the issue, and then you're going to lose the points because you didn't get it to work, which is a double whammy of horribleness. Or number 2, you do eventually solve the issue, but it ate up a lot of time. Neither of those are really good things, right? So when you're good at troubleshooting things, it makes a huge difference. It's the difference between getting your APs joined in 5 minutes rather than 20 minutes. It's the difference between getting your ICE authentication issue fixed in 3 minutes rather than 30 minutes or never. Sometimes you just get stuck in this, boy, I'm not sure what it is, so I'm trying this test. Okay, that's not quite right. Let's try this test. No, that's not quite right. And so, you get these iterative testing things that sometimes take multiple minutes per test, especially something like, mesh APs joining or something like that. It can get awful in terms of how long you suffer trying to figure this out. And so this is a place where you will save yourself tens and tens of minutes if you're decent at troubleshooting compared to if you struggle repeatedly with troubleshooting things. That's not to say that you might not run into a specific troubleshooting scenario that you particularly struggle on, but of the, say, 10 troubleshooting things that you have to fix, if you get through most of them really efficiently, that's good. That's what you're looking for, right? Avoiding rework. So what am I talking about here? Really, I'm talking about do the right thing the first time. Ideally, you do this because you read ahead. Now, there's also the rework that we do because we just made mistakes or just didn't really understand what it was that they wanted us to do. But oftentimes, rework comes intentionally in the lab because if you just took the lab in order, Section 1, Task 1, read it, do it. Section 1, Task 2, read it, do it. And on and on and on without ever reading ahead, I can pretty much guarantee you there will come a time when what you do here will be wrong because of some piece of information down here. Something down here is going to force a change in how you would have done things up here had you known this detail down below. And so there becomes a time penalty of, okay, I configured it the wrong way, put in some verification, maybe even some troubleshooting, who knows, and then I had to go back, change it to what it was supposed to be, re-verify, maybe even re-troubleshoot, who knows, just depends on the scenario here. What's that time penalty for having to go back and change it? And it's not just the time it takes to change the config, it's the time it took to put the initial config in there, plus any time to verify that gets wasted. So, things like you're configuring a bunch of WLANs on your controller, and then all of a sudden you get to the end of the section and they say something to the effect of, I'll make sure that when APs join up to this controller, by default, they don't have any WLANs configured on them. And then you realize, oh, none of my WLANs can be in the default AP group. Hey, what WLAN IDs did I happen to use when I created these WLANs? Probably 1, 2, 3. I can't change those WLAN IDs after the fact, so I have to blow away those WLANs, recreate them under different WLAN IDs, retest them and re-verify them to make sure that I didn't goof it up on my new configurations here. And so that's an example of something that has a kind of a heavier time penalty to it. Sometimes it's not that big of a deal, honestly. So for instance, you configure the ports for your lightweight APs, and you make them access ports. Okay. Later on, you realize, oh, this AP needs to be Flex Connect. We need to do local switching, so this needs to be a trunk port. Not the end of the world there, right? It takes you all of 30 seconds to flip an access port into a trunk port, check it, and you're on your way. So some things have a higher time penalty, some things have a low time penalty, but they do add up in here. So you definitely want to be on the lookout for things that are definitely going to cause you the higher time penalties and avoid doing the wrong thing the first time, at least on those things. So here, reading ahead is your biggest weapon in avoiding doing the wrong thing the first time. Do the right thing the first time, and you're going to save yourself time overall. Okay, order of operations. So in what order do I hit the different tasks within the lab? There is no one way that you have to do everything. So I can never give you, here is the perfect order of operations that would work for every single lab ever created. Every lab's a little bit different. Different labs have different dependencies between different tasks. And so you're going to need to figure out, okay, how can I work my way through this lab without having to continually stop what I'm doing so that I can go down here, do something so that I can come back here and keep going on. You know, you will have to jump around, but usually where things, it kind of like messes your flow up when you are halfway through configuring something only to realize, oh, whoops, I need to come down here and do that, and maybe I only need half of this thing down here so that I can complete this thing up here. But you know, why not just do this part the first to begin with, and then I'm not sort of wrecking the flow of what it is that I was trying to do up here. Because if you kind of, not that it's necessarily a massive time penalty for sometimes doing things, you know, having to stop and jump around, but mentally it can kind of wreck your flow. And when you lose your flow, it can take you out of your normal processes, and that can sometimes cause you to make mistakes. So hopefully you can do things so you have a natural flow. You can just do things to their completion in the appropriate order so that you can continually just work your way through. But other things that can sort of help you out, you know, our controllers. There's a number of things that can cause our controllers to have to be rebooted for things to take effect. Turning on lag, making a change to the virtual interface IP address, installing certificates, you know, a number of different things like that. And you might have a couple of those things. You know, maybe you have lag and you have to install some certificates. Well, you know, do you want to turn on lag, save, reboot, wait for it to reboot? Hopefully you're doing other things while it's rebooting, and then install certificates, save, reboot, wait for it to reboot. Or do you want to just spot those things, just do those together, then save and reboot? You know, things like that can sometimes save you time. Try to avoid having to frequently shift gears in the middle of tasks. Can you take advantage of downtime to do other things? So when you are waiting for a reboot, do not sit there, watch a reboot happen and, you know, twiddle your thumbs. You got to be doing something, reading something, configuring something else somewhere along the way, you know, jumping forward to something simple like, you know, maybe configuring some SNMP stuff or something basic later on in the lab. Never sit still in the lab for sure. So part of it is you do need that ability to jump around while you're waiting for certain things to happen. So again, never sit still, but try to make it so that there's less wait time to have to deal with. That's always a good thing. This can also help to avoid troubleshooting and rework too. If you know the order of doing things and how the interdependencies between the tasks are, the less likely you will be to have to, you know, do things wrong and fix it later. Okay, configuration accuracy. Really what this is reducing the amount of troubleshooting you do by not adding to the list of things that you have to troubleshoot. This is where when we misconfigure something, it always has a time penalty because we have to fix our configuration. Now the question is, do you just immediately realize that you fat-fingered something, or do you not realize it until your authentication isn't working, or until you know, your workgroup bridge can't connect up to your root AP or whatever it's going to be, and then you got to figure out, okay, well, why is this not working when it would have worked if you would have just typed things in correctly or clicked the appropriate boxes correctly? You knew what to do, it's just you goofed something up. The less we goof up, the less time we are fixing our own mistakes, the more time we have to configure and fix whatever mistakes they already had waiting for us are in the lab. So try to reduce the amount of mistakes that you make by try to building in methods of configuration that can hopefully reduce configuration mistakes. I'll talk about this in detail, I believe, in another video, but the less typing we have to do, the less clicking we have to do, just statistically should reduce the amount of potential mistakes that we need to do. So copy paste is an amazing way to increase your accuracy, things like that. Okay, using efficient configuration methods. So we're honestly getting towards the bottom of the barrel, and the interesting thing here is that this is one of the things people think of oftentimes first. Oh, I ran out of time, so I use the GUI a lot in the controllers, and so I'm going to become a CLI wizard, the best CLI person ever. And while yes, that will save you time, absolutely. I think people tend to overestimate the amount of time that this is truly going to save them. So I did a test. This is back in version 2 of the exam, back when I was originally, starting my teaching days, to try to see, okay, how much time can we really save configuring some really common things in the lab between CLI, GUI, and back in that day it was WCS, but Prime today, right? And and assuming that you were equally good at doing it on all of them. You were very efficient at the CLI, you were very efficient at the GUI, you were very efficient at Prime. So, as much of an apples to apples skill-wise as I could get, how much time were you saving? So the interesting thing was WCS, or what would be Prime nowadays, was in almost every single case the slowest, hands down. Not even close. The only time it was faster was for some very complex configurations that had to be replicated across at least like 3 controllers. But that was like the one time it actually eked out an advantage. Every other time it was usually significantly worse. So I never really recommend Prime. Prime's going to be even slower than WCS just because it's a slower server in overall. WCS was fairly efficient. But between CLI and the GUI, yes, in almost every instance, the CLI was the superior choice for almost everything. Sometimes the GUI was pretty close, and maybe it eked out a few things, but overall the CLI was faster. But how much faster is the question? I sort of calculated, based off of the amount of configuration, and this is specifically on controllers because we're already only doing CLI on the switches. You're probably, hopefully, only doing CLI in the autonomous AP, so the only place where you really have a difference that you can make is on the Air OS controllers. So, on the Air OS controllers, I think, if to be generous, maybe you save a grand total of 10 minutes by being a master CLI person. So is that worth all the work it becomes to be a master CLI person over someone who's just really good in the GUI, which a lot of us probably are already, compared to if you invested time in all of these other things I've talked about up until this point? Like if you invested all that time in being really good at troubleshooting stuff, or whatever it's going to be, what's your time worth? What's the return on investment of the time? Because we don't have infinite amount of time to invest in building every one of these last things up, right? So usually this is good if you can be a CLI person from like the very beginning of your studies. And I think I mentioned this in the video series 1. Yeah, you're going to save some time, but you just have to see, okay, is the learning curve of this worth it to save 10 minutes, maybe closer to 5 minutes, something like that. So, absolutely it can help, but it's probably not going to be the biggest difference maker by far of the overall equation of how long does it take you to complete the lab. So, I think if you could just, if you were like a so-so typer and you just invested 10 hours of focused work on building your typing skills, 15, 20 hours of building your typing skills, you'd probably see a bigger return on investment of that than becoming a CLI wizard in here. So, although you could always use the CLI to practice on typing speed, right? Hey, there would be a win-win. So I just want to let you know that it's not a massively huge thing. While it can help, it's not the biggest difference maker by far. Okay, so the last thing we'll kind of throw in speed here is really comfort and efficiency with the lab interface. And so what am I talking about here? So when you're taking the lab, you have two monitors in front of you, and I'll have a video about this, but you're going to have a lot of things to work with. We're going to have, potentially a dozen or more putty windows that we have to work with, the lab interface, RDP windows, notepads, different things all going on at the same time. And so being able to work with this interface in an efficient manner is going to save you time, as opposed to if you're constantly trying to figure out, okay, well, where's the putty window for this autonomous AP? Where's the putty window for this switch? Where's this diagram that I need to see? If you're inefficient at getting access to those windows and getting access to that information, it's just going to add seconds every single time you're flipping between different things. And you do that enough times to where that can then start to become kind of a bit of a difference maker in terms of how much time it takes to just navigate all the windows and information in front of you. So the more you can become efficient at that, it's going to save you overall over the course of the entire 7 hours, some minutes for sure. It'll save you minutes being efficient at this. And the nice thing is you don't have to really do anything super special for this. You can naturally practice this while you do your normal studies. If you can, set up two monitors, use individual windows for your putty sessions, and like I say, we'll talk about this a little bit more. But you want to, if you can, replicate the lab layout and the lab interfaces, which you can do with my racks. I mean, I designed my racks to replicate how you would access the real lab, so you can absolutely get the exact or very similar experience on my racks as you can for the real lab. So the more you just practice it and just get through the learning pain of how do I organize and deal with all this stuff, you know what, you're just going to naturally build an efficiency and you'll reap the benefits in the lab. So not every last thing that can possibly save you time in the lab, but these are by far the heaviest hitters in terms of that type of stuff. Now that you're really aware of it, you can hopefully make intelligent decisions as to, okay, I got a month left to study for my lab. Assess yourself in these different areas and think, okay, where can I best invest my time to get the biggest benefits in terms of how fast I'm going to be able to get through the lab. So that's really the goal of talking about all these things, is so that you can take that information and make the best decisions for you in terms of how you invest your time so that you get the biggest returns for lab success.